was that Elijah had prepared the way. He set things in place. He placed 12 stones around the altar, evoking God's burning desire for the 12 tribes to be one. So what will the spirit of Elijah do this time? Prepare the way, set things in place. As Messiah put it, Elijah must come first and restore all things. What do you mean by that? Restore all things. Restore all things. What things were once established that needed to be restored? What things have been spoken of and yet unfulfilled? Well, the early church knew full well what needed to be restored. People look at the life of the early church, where the full number, as Acts 2 puts it, the full number of those who believed lived together, shared all things in common. They look at that life and say, such a radical way of life isn't a requirement. It was just for that time period. But they were simply restoring the covenants spoken of in the law and through the prophets that had been spoken yet left abandoned. They knew exactly what Messiah meant when he said restore all things. That call was evoking the words of the prophets, who also spoke of rebuilding the ancient ruins, restoring the age-old foundations. There were many things spoken by prophets that were never resolved, never completed, and they represent a cause that needs to be restored. So the early believers knew that the restoration of all things included the restoration of the holy nation. So as Peter put it, they were a royal priesthood and a holy nation, restoring the command in Exodus 19 that they were to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Holy there means set apart or separated. We like to say not isolated, but insulated, sanctified for a special purpose. They were to be a nation, since Messiah said in Matthew 21:43 that the kingdom would be taken from the Jews and given not to a religion, but given to a nation who would bear the fruit of the kingdom. The fruit this nation would bear in this age would be a foretaste of the next age, or the kingdom age. The early believers also knew that the restoration of all things included the restoration of 12 tribes. Christians quote Acts 13 that talks about bringing salvation to the ends of the earth, but they don't quote the original verse that passage came from, which was Isaiah 49:6. According to Isaiah, salvation goes to the ends of the earth through a people who raise up 12 tribes. This is why Messiah chose 12 disciples. What we call the early church actually was a nation of 12 tribes. Read it yourself. It's in Acts 26:7, James 1:1. The bride is called 12 tribes in Revelation 21:12. The early believers also knew that the restoration of all things included the restoration of the hope of Deuteronomy 15:4, that there'd be no poor in the land. Acts 4:34 said, because of their sharing of possessions, there were not a needy person among them. They knew the charge in Psalms to be a home for the lonely had to be restored. The words of Isaiah to divide your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your home and care for them as your own family had to be answered. And it couldn't be answered any other way but in community. In community where you can bring the needy into your own home and care for them. They understood the call that his habitation would care for the orphans and widows, so he could be a father to the fatherless in his habitation. That's even how James defines true religion. The early believers also knew that the restoration of all things included the call for outspokenness. The cry of Moses' heart that all would speak was being restored as they gathered together, and each person had something to speak, something to sing or contribute. They believed if they did not hold fast their confidence, they were not his house. When they started having preachers who did all the speaking, they stopped being his house. The traditions they had, such as the Sabbath and the feasts, were to cause them to stop and consider what it meant to seek first the kingdom. The Sabbath was to cease and remember what they were living for. If something hindered their outspokenness, there were appointed times to examine themselves. So their festivals were full of meaning. And when the Jews started criticizing them for not keeping the feasts according to their ritualistic standards, Paul told them not to let anyone judge them, since their feasts were an overflow of their abundant life. And that life came from a persuasion that they were beginning to fulfill the age-old promises. They were the body of Messiah. They were restoring all things. They were taking on spiritual forces of darkness that have kept this age of oppression from coming to an end. As meaningful as those feasts were to them, even they were only a foretaste of what was to come, a preview. When their fervent love was lost, the words of Messiah were fulfilled, nightfall came, and the foreshadow was lost. But it must be raised up again before the coming age can begin. So before any ruler comes into power, a delegation has prepared the way and set things in place. They campaign for him. They spend their life's energy removing the influences of the former kingdom, certainly in their lives, so they have the confidence to persuade others of the value of the ruler to come. Messiah is no exception. The kingdom must be expressed on the earth first. So the children of light are the king's ambassadors. They've met the terms of peace. They've given up all their possessions, since you can't possibly be devoted to this cause and be holding on to your possessions. If you even look back once you set your hand to the plow, you're not fit for the task. The cause requires the kind of discipline a soldier has on the battlefield. He's not one bit concerned with civilian affairs. That's the rules of the game. The children of light spend their lives doing his business, preparing the way. As Elijah put the 12 stones in place, they will reestablish a spiritual nation of 12 tribes. So the foreshadow to the kingdom age will be shown by those who bear the fruit of the kingdom in this age. They are given the kingdom and will usher in the kingdom age. And it is the gospel of the kingdom that is the only gospel that brings this age of corruption to its finality. Matthew 24:14 says, this gospel, the word this being a definite article used for emphasis. This gospel will be proclaimed as a witness to all nations before the end can come. This is the cause that has been abandoned, and only those willing to turn their foot from doing their own thing can be given the desolate heritages. They will reclaim what has been lost. They'll repair the breach. They'll rebuild the ancient ruins. They'll raise up the age-old foundations by fulfilling the covenants that have been left in the dust. We are now calling all who now live in these present end-time days to be part of the restoration of all things. And if only you are willing to do his will, can you be drawn to this place of purification, a place where all those who believe live together once again and share all things in common. When that witness of the kingdom goes to the ends of the earth, when all have seen that distinct light, not a doctrine or another worthless religion, but a light, bright enough to expose and dispel the darkness that masquerades as light, when there's a clear witness demonstrated to the watching world, then the end will come.